Welcome back to our channel. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most fascinating stories in the Bible, the story of the 12 tribes of Israel. You might think the Bible is just an old book, but it's actually full of powerful truths that still matter today. It connects us to God's promises that have lasted through the ages. Now here's the big question. Did the 12 tribes of Israel really vanish? Or could their descendants still be around today, playing a part in the world we live in? In this video, we're going to explore the mystery behind the 12 tribes. Where did they come from? Why were they scattered across the earth? And most importantly, what does the Bible say about what will happen to them in the future? Are they truly lost forever? Or are there clues in prophecy that reveal their fate? As we go through this journey, you'll discover things that might completely change how you see this ancient story, because the truth might be closer to you than you think. If you're curious to find out what really happened to the 12 tribes and what it means for you today, make sure you watch until the end. This is a story you'll never forget. But before we begin, take a moment to like this video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss one of our powerful videos. And if you're ready to uncover the truth, drop a yes in the comments. Now, let's begin the journey. To understand what happened to the 12 tribes, we need to go way back, to a moment when history changed forever. It didn't start with a king or a prophet. It started with a miracle baby named Isaac, the long-awaited son of Abraham and Sarah. This wasn't just any baby. Isaac was born after years of waiting, and in a way that seemed impossible. But God made it happen. His birth was a sign that God's eternal promise to Abraham was real, a promise that would pass down to Isaac and then to his descendants. In Genesis 17 verse 19, God said to Abraham, "No, Sarah your wife will give you a son, and you will name him Isaac. I will make my covenant with him and with his descendants, and it will last forever." That promise still echoes today, and it's the beginning of the story of the 12 tribes. This wasn't just an ordinary blessing. It was the start of a powerful promise from God, a promise that would stretch far beyond Abraham's time and change the course of history. But take a moment and imagine being Abraham. He was 100 years old. His skin was wrinkled, his body tired from waiting so many years. And then, God tells him he's going to be the father of many nations. Can you imagine how that felt? The surprise, the doubt, and the small spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, the impossible could happen? And what about Sarah? She was 90 and had never been able to have a child. Could you believe such a promise if God spoke it over your life today? But God answered their doubts with one powerful question in Genesis 18 verse 14. Is anything too hard for the Lord? That question wasn't just for Sarah. It's for all of us. What things in your life have you called impossible that God still wants to do? What dreams have you given up on that heaven is getting ready to bring back to life? This wasn't just a story about a miracle baby. It was the beginning of a promise that would affect the entire world. Before there were kings, prophets, or great battles, there was a promise. And at the center of it was Isaac, a child born not just from human effort, but from faith. God had already spoken about this promise in Genesis 12 verses 2 to 3. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great. You will be a blessing, and through you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. And in Genesis 15 verse 5, God took Abraham outside and said, "Look up at the sky and count the stars, if you can. That's how many descendants you will have." Do you see it now? Isaac wasn't just a baby. He was the spark that would one day lead to Jacob, and through Jacob, the 12 sons who would become the 12 tribes of Israel. Each tribe would carry a name, a destiny, and a purpose given by God. But here's the mystery. If it all began with such power and purpose, how could it all just disappear? What if you were part of a promise that big? Would you recognize it? Would you carry it with fear or with faith? The answer to that, and the mystery of what happened to the 12 tribes, is just around the corner. But to understand the full story, we need to go even deeper into Isaac's life, and maybe even into your own. Isaac's birth was a miracle, but his life was also a test of faith. After the joy of his birth and God's promise, something happened that no one could have expected. A moment that challenged love, obedience, and trust, all at once. It's known as the binding of Isaac. In Genesis 22, God told Abraham to do the unthinkable, to offer his beloved son Isaac as a sacrifice. Can you imagine how Abraham felt? walking up that mountain with Isaac by his side. What on Isaac's back, silence between them, and a heavy ache in Abraham's heart? Can you imagine what it felt like to be Abraham in that moment? Would you have taken each step up the mountain with shaky knees, wondering if you were making a terrible mistake? Would you have turned back, questioning if the voice you heard was really from God? Now imagine this. You've waited your whole life for a child. You've prayed, cried, and hoped. And now you're holding a knife, standing over the very child you asked God for. Abraham ties Isaac up, places him on the altar, and lifts the blade. Everything falls silent. Then suddenly, heaven speaks. In Genesis 22 verse 12, an angel of the Lord calls out, "Do not lay a hand on the boy. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you truly fear God, because you have not held back your son, your only son." This wasn't just God stopping a sacrifice. It was something much deeper, a moment that sealed the promise between God and Abraham. This was the moment when God's covenant wasn't just words. It was tested and proven through obedience. Isaac wasn't just a promised child anymore. He was the chosen heir of God's plan. But ask yourself this: why would God ask for such a sacrifice, only to stop it at the last second? Maybe the test wasn't for God to learn something about Abraham. Maybe it was so Abraham could see how deep his trust in God really was. Maybe some promises only come to life when we're willing to give everything, even the things we love most, back to God. Isaac's story didn't end on that mountain. It became the foundation for something much greater, a legacy that would last forever. Isaac would grow up and become the father of Jacob. And Jacob, after a powerful encounter with God, would be given a new name, Israel, which means one who wrestles with God. From Jacob came 12 sons. But these sons weren't just a big family. They were the start of 12 tribes, each one carrying a special role in God's plan. So now we see Isaac not just as a man from the past, but as a key part of the bigger picture. He's the link between Abraham's dream and the 12 tribes that would spread God's purpose across the world. He was the connection between the stars Abraham saw in the sky and the people who would one day walk the earth. But now here's the real mystery. If God worked so powerfully to create this family and set these tribes in motion, how could they just disappear? How could something born from such a strong promise vanish without a trace? Isaac's story shows us that God's promises never fail, even if they pass through pain, confusion, or long delays. The same God who sent a ram up that mountain still watches over every generation. So ask yourself, if you were born into this promise, would you recognize it? Would you see yourself as part of something greater? Hold on to that thought, because what we'll uncover next about the 12 tribes might reveal something you've never considered. Not just about them, but about you. Now we turn to the story of Jacob, Isaac's son. Jacob is more than just the father of the tribes. His life was written by God even before he was born. From the moment he moved in his mother's womb, Jacob's life was filled with purpose and destiny. The future of entire nations, the weight of God's promise, and the mystery of spiritual inheritance. All of it would pass through one man, Jacob. Before Jacob was even born, before he opened his eyes to the world, God had already spoken a powerful word over his life. When Jacob's mother, Rebekah, felt a strange struggle inside her womb, she asked God what was happening. And in Genesis 25 verse 23, God answered, "Two nations are in your womb. Two peoples will be separated from within you. One will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger." Can you imagine hearing that? You're not just carrying twins, you're carrying nations. Their fight inside you is a sign of a conflict that will last for generations. And God says the younger son will rule over the older, completely flipping the natural order. This prophecy set the stage for one of the most intense rivalries in the Bible, Jacob and Esau. Esau came out first, strong, red-skinned, and full of energy. But it was Jacob, the second-born, who would receive the covenant promise. Why? Because God often chooses the unexpected, the second son instead of the first, the shepherd instead of the warrior, the barren woman instead of the fertile one. Even Isaac, Jacob's father, had been chosen over his half-brother Ishmael. Now, history was repeating itself. Jacob's journey to becoming the father of the 12 tribes would be full of struggle, strategy, and encounters with God. One of the most well-known and controversial moments in his story came when Esau returned home hungry, and Jacob offered him a bowl of stew in exchange for the birthright. You can read this in Genesis 25 verses 29 to 34. It sounds like a trick, but look deeper. Maybe Jacob, though flawed, actually valued the spiritual blessing, while Esau took it lightly. Later, Jacob, helped by his mother Rebekah, disguises himself as Esau and goes in to receive the final blessing from their father Isaac, whose eyesight was nearly gone. It was bold, risky, deceptive. Would you have done what Jacob did? Walked into your father's tent wearing goat skins, risking everything, to grab hold of a blessing that felt just out of reach. But what Jacob received that day wasn't just a wish. It was a spiritual blessing, tied directly to God's promise to Abraham. In Genesis 27 verses 28 to 29, Isaac says, "May God give you the dew of heaven and the richness of the earth. May nations serve you. Let people bow down to you. May those who curse you be cursed, and those who bless you be blessed." This wasn't just a father's hope. It was a spiritual declaration, one that couldn't be taken back. From that moment, Jacob was confirmed as the one chosen to carry God's covenant forward. Yes, he used deception, but God still honored the result. Why? Because while humans judge by appearances, God looks at the heart. And Jacob, for all his faults, truly desired the eternal promise. His name, Jacob, means heel grabber or trickster, a reflection of how he started. But that wouldn't be his final name. That change would come later. Still, this moment, when he received the blessing, was the turning point. Jacob's future would not only be defined by what he had gained, but also by what he would later struggle through, endure, and bring into the world. And now comes the big question. If you were in Jacob's shoes, what would you have done? Would you have dared to reach for the birthright? Or would you have followed tradition, letting others decide your future? And when blessings come through difficult or controversial moments, how can you tell if they're truly from God? Jacob's inheritance of the covenant wasn't just a family matter. It was part of God's bigger plan, a plan that would shape the future of entire nations. His 12 sons would carry names that still matter to this day. But before that could happen, Jacob's story had to go through another deep transformation, one that would change his life forever and give him a name remembered around the world. After Jacob took the blessing that was meant for Esau, his life didn't become easy. In fact, it got much harder. Afraid of Esau's anger, Jacob ran away into the unknown, carrying only what he could hold and a heart full of fear and uncertainty. As he traveled toward his uncle Laban's house, Jacob found himself alone in the wilderness, using a stone for a pillow. And it was there, at his lowest moment, that God gave him a dream that changed history. In Genesis 28 verses 12 to 15, the Bible says Jacob saw a ladder reaching from earth to heaven, with angels going up and down on it. At the top of the ladder stood God himself. Imagine that, a man on the run, weighed down by guilt, suddenly sees heaven opened above him, and angels moving between two worlds. Then God spoke. He repeated the same covenant he had made with Abraham and Isaac. "I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. The land you're lying on, I will give to you and your descendants. Through you and your family, all the families of the earth will be blessed." But why would God speak such a powerful promise to a man who was running away? Maybe it's because God doesn't wait for you to be perfect. He often meets you in the middle of your fear, failure, and brokenness. Have you ever felt unworthy of God's attention, only to find that's the moment he chooses to speak to you? This wasn't just a dream. It was a turning point in Jacob's life. He realized he wasn't just running from something. He was running toward his purpose. When Jacob woke up, he was in awe and said, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I didn't even know it." Genesis 28 verse 16, he took the stone he had used as a pillow, poured oil on it, and named the place Bethel, which means house of God. There, Jacob made a vow. If God would protect him and bring him back home safely, he would serve God for the rest of his life. The man who had run away in fear was now becoming a man of faith, a pilgrim on a journey with God. Jacob's journey wasn't easy. When he reached Laban's house, he faced both blessings and challenges. He fell in love with Rachel, but was tricked into marrying her sister Leah first. What followed was a complicated life. 4 wives, years of hard work, emotional pain, and eventually, 12 sons. By Genesis 35 verses 22 to 26, we finally see the promise starting to take shape. Now the sons of Jacob were 12. Here are their names. From Leah, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun from Rachel, Joseph and Benjamin from Bilhah, Rachel's servant Dan and Naphtali, from Zilpah, Leah's servant Gad, and Asher 12 sons. 12 tribes, each born in different ways, some from love, some from rivalry, some from pain, and some from hope. But all of them were chosen. So here's a question for you. Has your life been complicated, messy, misunderstood? Could it be that, like Jacob's sons, you too are carrying something sacred beneath the surface? These 12 sons of Jacob would become the fathers of tribes. And those tribes would be the fulfillment of a promise God made long ago under a starry sky. In Genesis 22 verse 17, God told Abraham, "I will multiply your descendants like the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore." And now, we see that promise coming to life, not through comfort, but through endurance. Jacob's family wasn't perfect, but it had a purpose. And the 12 tribes weren't just family lines. They were part of God's plan, each one holding a special role in his design. But here's a question worth thinking about. If these tribes were chosen by God, if they were born from such a powerful promise, how could they fade from history? Their beginning was so detailed, so miraculous. So what happened next? And more importantly, where are they now? Hold on to that question, because the next part of the story holds mysteries that have puzzled scholars, inspired prophets, and might even lead you to surprising answers. But before we go there, there's one more powerful moment in Jacob's life we need to explore. You see, Jacob's story didn't just climax with the birth of 12 sons. Something much more personal and much more holy was still to come. Jacob wasn't just building a family. He was becoming someone new. His transformation didn't happen in peace and comfort. It happened in struggle, a mysterious, spiritual battle that changed his life forever. After many years away, Jacob was about to meet his brother Esau, the very man he had deceived and run from. He was afraid. Would Esau forgive him or attack him? On the night before they met, Jacob was completely alone. He stood on the edge of everything he feared and everything he had become. And that's exactly when God met him, not through fire or thunder, but through a wrestling match in the darkness. In Genesis 32, a mysterious man appears and wrestles with Jacob all night long. Some say it was an angel, but many believe it was God himself, appearing in a hidden form. Can you picture it? Jacob, alone by the river, his heart pounding, shadows flickering. Suddenly, he's grabbed by a force stronger than anything he's ever felt. He doesn't know if this being has come to bless him or break him, but Jacob holds on, all through the night, even in pain, even with tears and sweat. He refuses to let go. And then, in one of the most powerful moments in the Bible, Jacob cries out, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." Genesis 32 verse 26. That wasn't a demand, it was faith. And heaven responded. The being said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with men, and you have overcome." Genesis 32 verse 28. In that one sentence, Jacob's identity completely changed. He was no longer Jacob, the trickster, the deceiver, the one who ran. He became Israel, the one who wrestles with God and wins. Have you ever felt like that? Like you're wrestling with God in the middle of the night, spiritually, emotionally, maybe even physically? Have you ever held on through your darkest hour, refusing to let go until God gave you a blessing, a purpose, a name? That name, Israel, wasn't just a symbol. It was the beginning of a new legacy. That new name, Israel, was more than just a title. It was a prophetic banner, a name that would soon be carried by an entire nation. Through his 12 sons, Jacob's new identity would live on. The 12 tribes would not just carry the name Israel as a last name, but as a spiritual calling. And now it becomes clear, the birth of the 12 tribes wasn't just about having children. It was part of God's greater plan, a story of redemption told through faith, struggle, and grace. These 12 sons would become the foundation of Israel's history. Their descendants would one day march out of slavery in Egypt, led by Moses. They would cross the Red Sea, receive God's law at Mount Sinai, and enter the Promised Land. Each tribe had a purpose. Levi would become the tribe of priests, serving in the temple. Judah would carry the royal bloodline, leading to King David, and eventually to Jesus the Messiah. Every tribe played an important role. Together, they were the living proof of the promise God made to Abraham, then Isaac, and now Jacob. Even today, the legacy of these tribes still echoes in history, in prophecy, and even in mysteries that are still unfolding. Their names were engraved on the breastplate of the high priest in the Old Testament. And in Revelation 21 verse 12, those same names are carved into the gates of the New Jerusalem. So no, their story didn't end when they were scattered. It continues through prophecy, through restoration, and maybe through you. Now ask yourself this deeper question. If Jacob only became Israel after struggling with God, could your own struggles be preparing you for your transformation too? Maybe the dark season you're in, the pain, the waiting, the uncertainty, is leading you to a name you haven't yet heard, and a purpose you haven't yet discovered. Because the story of Jacob and the 12 tribes isn't just about ancient history. It's about God's faithfulness, even when people fall short. It proves that God can take a deceiver and turn him into a leader. He can take a broken family and raise up a holy nation. And what he did back then, he's still doing today. But what happened next? These tribes were chosen and blessed by God. Did they thrive forever? Or did something, or someone, cause them to vanish? Stay with the story, because the mystery is about to grow even deeper. As Jacob, now called Israel, reaches the final days of his life, something sacred happens. The same man who once ran from his brother, who wrestled with angels, who faced grief and joy, now prepares to leave behind something far more powerful than land or money. What he gives his sons is a spiritual map, a prophetic message that would shape the future of a nation. In Genesis 49, Jacob calls his 12 sons to gather around his bed. But what he speaks over them is not just a father's goodbye. It's prophecy, God speaking through the voice of a man who had seen him face to face. Each message is more than personal advice. It's a divine word, shaped by both the son's character and the purpose God had written into their bloodline. Can you imagine being in that tent, hearing your name called, waiting to hear whether you'll be blessed, corrected, or chosen for something far bigger than yourself? This wasn't just a family moment, it was a holy ceremony. Jacob wasn't simply saying goodbye to his sons. He was passing on the covenant God first gave to Abraham, then to Isaac, and now to the 12 sons who would become the tribes of Israel. Every word Jacob spoke mattered. Each blessing was like a seed. It would grow into something great or, in some cases, fade because of failure. Jacob began with Reuben, his firstborn. Reuben should have received the highest honor, but instead, he was remembered for a serious mistake. In Genesis 49 verses 3 to 4, Jacob says, "Reuben, you are my firstborn, my strength, and the first of my power, excelling in honor and in might. But you are as unstable as water. You will not succeed, because you went to your father's bed and defiled it." These words hit hard, like thunder. Reuben, once meant for greatness, was prophetically pushed down. Why? Because of what he did in Genesis 35 verse 22. He slept with Bilhah, Jacob's concubine. That one dishonorable act left a lasting mark. Can you imagine standing there, hearing your father say this? Knowing it wasn't just about you, but your entire tribe's future? This is what makes the moment so serious. Jacob's words weren't just advice or emotion. They were spiritual declarations. They shaped favor, legacy, and leadership. For Reuben, the result was clear. His tribe would never lead. It would fade into the background of history, never forgotten, but never first. And yet, even in judgment, there's a small thread of grace. Reuben wasn't erased. He was still counted among the 12 tribes. He lost his position, but not his place. Then something changes, something holy and heavy. As Jacob continues down the line of sons, he reaches his fourth son, Judah. Here, the tone shifts completely. Jacob's words to Judah aren't a warning or a rebuke. They are full of power, honor, and deep spiritual meaning. It's as if Jacob's voice isn't just his own anymore. It becomes a voice echoing from heaven, a divine prophecy. In Genesis 49 verses 8 to 10, Jacob says, "Judah, your brothers will praise you. Your hand will be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons will bow before you." Judah is a young lion. He lies down like a lion. Who dares to wake him? The scepter will not leave Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until Shiloh comes, and to him will be the obedience of the nations. Can you feel the power in these words? This isn't just a blessing. It's like a spiritual coronation. Judah, not the oldest, not the most expected, is chosen. He's given the scepter, the symbol of kingship and leadership. The image of a lion becomes the symbol of his tribe, fierce, majestic, and unstoppable. Even the name, Judah, which means praise, becomes a sign of both honor and authority. And then Jacob says something mysterious. Until Shiloh comes. Who is Shiloh? This name has stirred hearts and inspired questions for generations. Many believe it is a prophetic name for the Messiah, a figure of peace, rule, and divine authority. Someone who would come from the tribe of Judah. Someone who would one day receive the obedience of all people. Someone we now know as Jesus Christ. The word Shiloh is often believed to mean the one to whom it belongs. It's a hidden reference to a divine king, a Messiah who would one day come and rule. And that prophecy came true through the tribe of Judah. From Judah came Israel's greatest king, David. And through David's family line, hundreds of years later, came Jesus Christ, the Lion of Judah, the King of Kings. Have you ever stopped to think about how amazing that is? Jacob, long before David or Jesus were born, spoke a blessing that matched perfectly with future prophecy. He didn't just speak to the moment. He foretold the royal bloodline that would one day rule Israel and the whole world. How could he know this unless God's Spirit was guiding his words? Now think about Judah, the man receiving this prophecy. He wasn't perfect. He once suggested selling his brother Joseph into slavery. But later in life, he changed. He even offered to take Benjamin's place, showing real courage and selflessness. This shows us something important. True leadership doesn't come from perfection. It comes from transformation. Do you ever feel like your past mistakes disqualify you? Don't forget, God often chooses broken people to lead and bless others. From that moment on, Judah's tribe was marked not just by strength or praise, but by destiny. All the kings of Israel, including David and Solomon, came from Judah. And most importantly, Jesus was born in Bethlehem, a town in the land of Judah, fulfilling Jacob's blessing in a way no human could have planned. Judah's blessing wasn't just a family honor. It was a heavenly prophecy, woven into God's plan to save the world. The lion, the scepter, the lawgiver, all these symbols would shape the Bible from Genesis to Revelation. In Revelation 5 verse 5, Jesus is called the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David. He has conquered. The connection is crystal clear. The tribe of Judah wasn't just powerful. It was chosen by God to carry the hope of salvation for all people. One of the most moving blessings Jacob gives is to his son Joseph. Joseph had suffered more than most. He was thrown into a pit by his own brothers, sold as a slave, falsely accused, and sent to prison. But he never gave up. And in the end, he rose to become a ruler in Egypt, saving nations from famine. When Jacob looks at Joseph, you can feel the love of a father. But even more, you sense the recognition of a divine destiny, a life refined through pain, but used by God. Jacob's words to Joseph aren't just kind. They are powerful blessings, filled with meaning. In Genesis 49 verses 22 to 25, Jacob says, "Joseph is a fruitful branch, a branch growing by a spring. His branches climb over the wall. Archers attacked him with hate, but he stood strong. His hands were made strong by the mighty God of Jacob, by the shepherd, the rock of Israel, by the God of your father who helps you, by the Almighty who blesses you with blessings from heaven above, blessings from the deep below, blessings of the body and the womb." These words are like refreshing water in a dry land. Joseph's life, full of betrayal and hardship, became a story of redemption. He didn't just survive, he thrived. He didn't become bitter, he became a blessing. And Jacob, in his final words, honors the way Joseph turned pain into purpose. Can you hear it? The victory in Jacob's words over Joseph isn't just about remembering the past. It's about showing where Joseph's strength truly came from, God. Joseph went through so much pain. His own brothers betrayed him. He was taken to a foreign land, falsely accused, and forgotten in prison. But through all of it, Joseph's faith didn't break, it grew deeper. Have you ever felt like people were against you? like you were being attacked by things you couldn't see? If so, Joseph's story is your story too. His blessing reminds us, what was meant to bury you may actually be feeding your growth. Jacob didn't see Joseph as trapped or limited. He saw him as a fruitful branch, stretching out over walls, beyond boundaries. Joseph's strength didn't come from power or politics. It came from God, the mighty one of Jacob, whom Jacob now calls the shepherd and the rock of Israel. Beautiful pictures of protection, stability, and leadership. Even in betrayal, even in exile, Joseph still carried God's favor. And here's the amazing part. His trials made him stronger, not bitter. But Joseph's blessing doesn't stop with him alone. Before giving these final words, Jacob does something sacred. In Genesis 48 verses 5 to 6, Jacob adopts Joseph's two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, as his own. Your two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, born in Egypt, are now mine, just like Reuben and Simeon. This wasn't just a kind gesture. It was a legal and spiritual act. It meant Joseph would receive a double portion of the inheritance. Instead of one tribe, he would now be represented by two, Ephraim and Manasseh, each receiving their own land and legacy. Why does this matter? Because Reuben, the firstborn, lost his blessing through sin. Now that blessing flows to Joseph through his sons. This is a picture of restoration and reward. Joseph, once rejected by his brothers, is now honored with twice the legacy. Doesn't that sound like something only God can do? To repay what was stolen, to turn pain into purpose, and turn injustice into inheritance. But there's still a mystery. Even though Manasseh was older, Ephraim was blessed more. Once again, God flips human expectations, just like he did with Jacob over Esau, Isaac over Ishmael, and now Ephraim over Manasseh. Over and over, we see the pattern. God doesn't follow human order. He follows his divine plan. And in time, Ephraim became so important. The name was used to describe the entire northern kingdom of Israel. Jacob's blessings weren't just personal, they were prophetic. They were like blueprints for the future, shaping the tribes of Israel for generations. And here's something even more amazing. Even those who were rebuked, even those with a shameful past, were not left out of God's plan. They were given a chance at redemption. Take Levi, for example. Along with his brother Simeon, Levi took violent revenge in Genesis 34 after their sister Dinah was mistreated in Shechem. Jacob didn't ignore their violence. In Genesis 49 verses 5 to 7, he says, Simeon and Levi are brothers. Their swords are weapons of violence. I will scatter them in Jacob and divide them in Israel. This was a harsh judgment. Their future wouldn't include land of their own. They would be spread out. But even here, God's mercy shines through. His justice didn't cancel his grace. Because later on, Levi's tribe is redeemed in a powerful way. In Exodus 32 verses 26 to 29, during the Golden Calf Rebellion, when the people turned away from God, something powerful happened. It was the tribe of Levi who stood with Moses, defending God's holiness. Because of their loyalty, God gave them a special role. The Levites didn't receive a land like the other tribes. Instead, they were set apart to serve God directly, as priests, teachers, and caretakers of the tabernacle. Isn't that amazing? The same tribe that was once cursed to be scattered now became the closest to God's presence. They would carry the Ark of the Covenant, offer sacrifices, teach God's law, pray for the people. This shows us something powerful. Sometimes your biggest failure, when given to God, can become the very thing God uses to shape your purpose. This theme continues throughout Genesis 49. Each of Jacob's blessings to his sons isn't just a comment about their personality. It's a prophetic look into the future, a preview of what would happen to their families and tribes for generations to come. These words are not random. They are God-inspired declarations that shape the future of Israel's spiritual, political, and territorial identity. From the conquest of Canaan under Joshua, to the kingdoms ruled by David and Solomon, to the times of exile and return, these blessings laid the foundation of everything that followed. Jacob wasn't just giving out family blessings. He was renewing the covenant, the same promise God gave to Abraham in Genesis 12 and to Isaac. Now, it was being sealed in the lives of Jacob's 12 sons. Can you feel the importance of that moment? Imagine standing in front of your father, as he speaks words that would echo through your children's children for thousands of years. And those blessings didn't fade. Even as Israel went through victories and failures, each tribe kept its unique role and identity. Judah, the lion, gave rise to kings, and eventually to Jesus, the Lion of Judah. Levi, once scattered, became priests who stood between heaven and earth. Joseph, through Ephraim and Manasseh, multiplied across the land and became a symbol of blessing and favor. Every tribe had strengths and weaknesses, wins and struggles, but together they formed a beautiful design shaped by God Himself. Isn't it incredible? God didn't build His nation through perfect people. He used flawed men who were deeply chosen. What if your failures aren't the end, but actually the starting point for something greater? These tribal blessings were not a conclusion. They were the beginning of God's plan for a nation. This plan would carry through, from Moses leading them through the wilderness, to Solomon building the temple, to the prophets calling people back to God, even to the apostles in the New Testament. The covenant God made under the stars with Abraham was now deeply planted in the hearts of 12 tribes. But something mysterious happened. If God gave them such clear promises, how could so many tribes disappear? What force scattered them? And are they really gone? Or could they still be out there, hidden, waiting for God's perfect time? The covenant was renewed, the tribes were established, but their disappearance remains a mystery. Now, after centuries of slavery in Egypt, after 40 years in the wilderness, the moment the people had long waited for had come. The children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob stood at the edge of the promised land, ready to step into the promise God made with His own words. But this wasn't just a land grab. It was a spiritual moment, a divine fulfillment. This moment was the fulfillment of a promise God made long ago to one man under the stars, and now it was coming true through a whole nation. Led by Joshua, who took over after Moses, the Israelites crossed the Jordan River and began to take the land of Canaan, the place often called the land flowing with milk and honey. But this journey wasn't easy. They faced battles and tests of faith. From the walls of Jericho falling without a single sword to fighting powerful kings, every victory showed that God was with them. And every time they stepped into enemy land, they were walking on the very land God promised in the book of Genesis. In Joshua chapters 13 to 21, the Bible gives a detailed account of how the land was divided among the 12 tribes of Israel. But this wasn't just about politics or land rights. It was a holy assignment given by God Himself. Imagine being there, the leaders of every tribe gathered, waiting to hear where they and their families would live forever. What land would be theirs? What borders would mark their home? What legacy would they pass down? In Joshua 13 verses 1 to 7, God speaks directly to Joshua. You are now old, and there is still much land left to take, divided among the tribes as I've commanded you. And how is the land divided? Not by personal opinion, not by rank or status, but by casting lots, a sacred way to let God decide every boundary. What may have looked like random chance to people was actually divine design. Every tribe's territory was part of God's plan from the beginning. But not every tribe received land in the same way. Reuben, Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh had already claimed land east of the Jordan River. They had asked Moses for it and promised to help fight with the others, and their loyalty was honored. That left 9.5 tribes still waiting for their land west of the Jordan. Can you imagine what that felt like? Waiting for your promised land, not knowing where exactly your future would be, feeling both hope and nervousness as the lots were cast and God's will was revealed. Each tribe's land was different. Some had rich farmland, some had rivers or strong natural defenses. Judah, for example, received a territory that would later become home to Israel's kings. Others, like Dan, struggled to keep control of their land, but one thing was true for all. God Himself chose every piece of land. It wasn't just land. It was a spiritual gift, a fulfillment of God's promise in Genesis 17 verse 8. I give to you and your descendants the land of Canaan, where you are now strangers, as an everlasting possession. And I will be their God. The people who were once strangers were now owners, stewards of the land God had prepared for them. The promise had now become real land. But even after this amazing fulfillment, God reminded Joshua, there is still much land left to take. Isn't that just like our walk with God? He gives us blessings, but also calls us to keep moving forward. He fulfills his promises, but always invites us to trust him for more. There's always more ground to cover, more faith to grow. Dividing the promised land wasn't just a practical or political task. It was a sacred moment, the visible proof of a promise that started long ago under a starry sky, when God spoke to a man named Abraham. Every boundary marked, every piece of land assigned wasn't just measured in feet or cubits. It was faith turned into physical ground. The map of Israel was shaped by God's own hand. Back in Genesis 15 verses 18 to 21, God had told Abraham exactly what land his descendants would own. To your descendants, I give this land from the river of Egypt to the great Euphrates, the land of the Kenite, Kenizzites, Cadmonites, Hittites, Perizzites, Rephaim, Amorites, Canaanites, Girgashites, and Jebusites. This wasn't a vague dream, it was a clear promise. God even named the nations Israel would one day replace. Now, centuries later, as each tribe received its portion, every piece of land was a reminder that God never forgets his word. Can you imagine what it felt like for them? To step onto land that your great-great-grandfather was promised? To walk under the sun and say, "This land is mine, because God said so"? Each territory became more than just land. It became a reminder of their identity. They weren't just 12 tribes. They were God's chosen people, living in land that had been prophesied, protected, and prepared just for them. Let's take a closer look at a few examples. Judah's tribe got a large area in the south, from the wilderness to rich valleys. This wasn't random. This land would one day be the birthplace of King David, and much later, Jesus Christ, the Lion of Judah. All of it fulfilled the prophecy Jacob gave in Genesis 49. Could it be that where you are placed, your home, your job, your role, is tied to your God-given purpose? Ephraim, one of Joseph's sons, received rich and central land in Canaan. It reflected Joseph's double blessing and his honored position. Ephraim became one of the strongest tribes in the northern kingdom, with influence far beyond its borders. Just like Joseph's life, Ephraim's land was fruitful, a branch reaching over the wall. Levi, but not every tribe received land the same way. The tribe of Levi, descendants of Jacob's son Levi, didn't get one large area like the others. Instead, they were given 48 cities scattered throughout Israel, each with small areas of land around them. This wasn't a punishment, it was a holy assignment. They weren't called to farm or fight for land. They were called to serve between God and the people, to teach, to offer sacrifices, to minister. In Deuteronomy 18 verses 1 to 2, God made it clear, "The priests and Levites shall have no land as inheritance. The Lord himself is their inheritance. They shall eat the offerings made by fire to the Lord. The Lord himself is their inheritance." Imagine that. While the other tribes received land, cities, and crops, the tribe of Levi received something far greater, God himself. They didn't have a single territory like the others, but they were scattered throughout the entire land. Why? So that worship, truth, and God's law would never be limited to one place. No matter where someone lived in Israel, a Levite would be nearby, ready to teach, guide, and serve as a reminder of covenant, holiness, and grace. This division of land wasn't just political. It was deeply spiritual. The Promised Land was more than just a place to live. It was God's holy dwelling place. It was the stage where his people would live out their relationship with him. As God said in Exodus 19 verse 6, "You shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." The land was the stage, but the people were the message. So what happens when a holy nation forgets their holy ground? What happens when tribes that were once full of promise start to rebel or even disappear from history? The land was given. The covenant was visible. But soon, the mystery of the lost tribes would begin. Because the story of the 12 tribes doesn't end when they enter the land. That moment was only the beginning, the start of a sacred responsibility. Receiving the Promised Land was not just a reward. It was a covenant burden, a call to live as God's people in a land that belonged to him. They were told to drive out the wicked nations living in Canaan, tear down idols, build a society based on justice, truth, and God's commandments. But over time, cracks began to appear. They had land, but often lacked faithfulness. Instead of staying holy, many tribes compromised with their neighbors, married people who worshipped other gods, allowed false religions and injustice to grow in their culture. This led to a cycle: rebellion, judgment, mercy, repeat. In the time of the judges, the tribes would sometimes unite to fight enemies like the Midianites, Philistines, or Moabites. But their unity was weak. They often fought each other instead of staying as one. Have you ever seen something so divinely built fall apart? Not because of outside attacks, but because of the people inside? Things got worse after King Solomon died. The nation split into two: the northern kingdom, Israel, with 10 tribes; the southern kingdom, Judah, with 2 tribes. This division was caused by political fights and spiritual corruption. Even though prophets like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Hosea, and Amos pleaded with the people to turn back to God, most didn't listen. They had the land, but they had forgotten the God of the land. Eventually, the consequences came. In 722 BC, the powerful Assyrian Empire invaded the northern kingdom. The 10 tribes were taken away, scattered into other nations. They became known as the lost tribes of Israel. Over time, their names faded and their identity was blurred. Then, in 586 BC, the southern kingdom also fell. Babylon destroyed Jerusalem, burned the temple, and took the tribe of Judah into exile. Was this the end? Had the covenant been broken forever? Would the names of the tribes vanish like dust in the wind? Not in God's eyes. The promises God made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob could not be erased by human failure. Even when the people were scattered and living far from their land, God began speaking again, this time through prophets like Ezekiel, Zechariah, and Isaiah. He spoke of a future where the people would return, the land would be given back, the covenant would be restored. In Ezekiel 47 verses 13 to 14, God says clearly, "These are the borders by which you will divide the land among the 12 tribes of Israel. Joseph will receive 2 portions. You will divide it equally, for I promised this land to your ancestors, and now it will be your inheritance." Even while they were in exile, God was planning their return. Even during judgment, He was preparing a way for redemption. Can you see how faithful God is? Even when the tribes forgot Him, He never forgot them. What seems lost might only be hidden for a time, waiting for God's perfect moment to be revealed. The 12 tribes were never just about land or family lines. They were living symbols of God's promises. Judah would bring forth the Messiah, Levi would serve in the temple, Joseph, through Ephraim and Manasseh, would lead in the north. Yes, they made many mistakes. But the covenant, God's promise, remained strong. The land, once divided by God's own direction, became the stage where His plan unfolded generation after generation. Even now, the legacy of the 12 tribes continues. Through scripture, through prophecy, through promise. In Revelation 21 verse 12, we read about 12 gates in heaven, each bearing the name of one of the 12 tribes. This reminds us that what God begins, He will finish. The scattered tribes? They're not forgotten. They will play a role in the final chapters of God's plan. But now, we reach a major turning point in their story, one that changed their future forever. At first, all 12 tribes were united under one kingdom, especially during the golden years of King David and his son Solomon. But after Solomon died, everything changed. His son, Rehoboam, became king. Instead of leading with wisdom, he ruled with arrogance, ignoring the advice of his elders. This caused a split in the nation. The northern kingdom kept the name Israel and was made up of 10 tribes. The southern kingdom, called Judah, was made up of Judah and Benjamin, along with the Levites who stayed near the temple in Jerusalem. But the northern kingdom quickly turned away from God. They separated from the temple, the true worship of God, the line of David. They fell into idol worship and spiritual corruption. Many kings came and went, but most led the people further away from God. Prophets like Elijah, Amos, and Hosea cried out to them, warning them to repent. But the people refused to listen. Can you imagine living in the land God gave you, hearing His warnings, and still turning away from Him? How many chances can a nation get before judgment finally comes? Sadly, that judgment came swiftly. In 722 BC, during the rule of King Shalmaneser of Assyria, the powerful Assyrian Empire attacked the northern kingdom of Israel. As recorded in 2 Kings 17 verses 5 to 6, the king of Assyria went through all the land, and came to Samaria. He laid siege to it for 3 years. In the 9th year of King Hoshea, the king of Assyria captured Samaria and took the Israelites to Assyria. He settled them in Hala, by the Habor River, and in the towns of the Medes. For 3 long years, the city of Samaria was surrounded, full of fear, hunger, and silence. And when the city finally fell, the visible legacy of 10 tribes collapsed with it. The Assyrians were known for their brutal strategy. They removed entire populations and forced them to live in foreign lands. The Israelites were taken from their homes and scattered across distant places like Hala, the Habor River, and cities in Media. These weren't just names on a map. They became graveyards for memory, places where identity faded. This wasn't just a military defeat, it was a spiritual breaking point. Removed from their promised land, the tribes began to blend into foreign cultures. They married people from other nations, learned new languages, adopted new customs, and slowly disappeared from their original story. Their names, once engraved in stone in Israel, were now only spoken in whispers or wondered about in silence. And that's how the term, the lost tribes of Israel, began. Not because God had forgotten them, but because the world did. So what does it mean for a chosen people to become invisible? Can identity really disappear if it was once part of God's promise? Or maybe, what's lost to man is still remembered in heaven. Some believe the tribes were completely absorbed, their bloodlines now part of Assyrian, Persian, and other cultures. But others believe remnants survived, hidden in faraway places, waiting for the right time to be found again. Over the years, different groups, from Africa, Asia, Europe, and even the Americas, have claimed to be descendants of these lost tribes. Could they be right? Despite all that happened, one truth stands strong: God never breaks his covenant. Even though the tribes were scattered, the prophets continued to speak about their return and restoration. The land may no longer remember their footsteps, but God never forgets a promise. And so we're left with a mystery. Who were they? Where did they go? Could they still be out there, hidden in plain sight, waiting for God to call them back? The answers are not just in old books, but in prophecy, in history, and maybe even in the days still to come. Even though many say the 10 tribes are lost, the Bible tells a different story, a story that's still unfolding. Yes, they were scattered. Yes, they were exiled. But did God truly let them go? Can a people handpicked by God himself just disappear? The prophet Amos gives us a powerful image in Amos 9 verse 9. I will command, and I will sift the house of Israel among all nations, as grain is sifted in a sieve, yet not one kernel will fall to the ground. In other words, God is still watching every piece. Not a single person, not even the smallest, will be forgotten. Can you picture it? God's hands gently shaking a sieve, not to lose anything, but to refine it. Yes, the people of Israel were scattered, but not forgotten. Not a single person slipped through his fingers. Even when they were far away in exile, God still knew them. Every name, every story, every heart. This idea is beautifully echoed in Hosea 1 verses 10 to 11, where the prophet speaks of a great reversal. The number of the people of Israel will be like the sand on the seashore, too many to count. And in the very place where it was once said to them, you are not my people, they will be called children of the living God. What an amazing promise. In the same lands where they were rejected and forgotten, God will one day call them his children again. Could it be that what looks like a loss is actually just a pause in a bigger story? And could we be living in the time where that restoration is beginning to happen? Hosea continues, the people of Judah and Israel will be brought back together. They will choose one leader, and they will come out of the land united. This isn't just about return, it's about reunion. The two kingdoms, once divided, will become one again. And who is this one leader? Many believe it points to the Messiah, the one who will unite all of God's people under his rule. The mystery of the lost tribes has fascinated people for generations. Some believe the tribes moved far away, to Asia, Africa, or even the Americas, and became part of hidden people groups. Others think small groups may have stayed close to Israel and slowly merged back into the Jewish population after the exile. And the New Testament still talks about them. In James 1 verse 1, we read, to the 12 tribes scattered among the nations, greetings. Even back then, people still remembered the 12 tribes. They were scattered, yes, but not erased. They were still part of the story. And in Revelation 7 verses 4 to 8, the Apostle John sees a powerful vision. 144,000 people, 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes, sealed by God in the end times. This shows that the tribes are not only remembered, they are restored, sealed, and set apart for a special purpose. Isn't it amazing? The last book of the Bible still carries their names, names that many thought were lost forever. What does this tell us? That even if human history forgets, God remembers. Even if borders are erased and language is lost, God's promises stay strong. So what if some of their descendants are walking among us today, completely unaware of their ancient identity? Could the great regathering that prophets like Ezekiel and Hosea spoke of be just around the corner? The tribes were scattered, but they were never forgotten. Their names are still written on the gates of the New Jerusalem, Revelation 21 verse 12. And the God who told Abraham that his children would be as many as the stars, he hasn't stopped counting. The story of the 12 tribes doesn't end with their exile. In fact, that was only the middle. What started as a covenant with one man, Abraham, and was shattered by disobedience and exile, is now a mystery of God's memory, prophetic destiny, and a love that never lets go. Their scattering wasn't the end. It was just a comma in a much greater story, one of redemption, return, and a God who always keeps his promises. So, the question still remains, where are the descendants of the 12 tribes of Israel today? Are they hiding in plain sight, blended into the nations of the world? Are they scattered across the earth, simply waiting for the voice of their shepherd to call them back home? Historically, the fate of the 10 tribes from the northern kingdom of Israel has sparked debate, theories, and even legends. After the Assyrian conquest in 722 BC, those tribes were taken from their land and spread across other nations. Some believe they completely vanished, that they lost their culture and identity over time. But the Bible tells a different story. God never stopped watching over them. In Ezekiel 37 verses 21 to 22, God makes a powerful promise. I will gather the people of Israel from the nations where they've been scattered. I will make them one nation again on the mountains of Israel. They will no longer be two separate kingdoms. This isn't just a hopeful idea. It's a divine promise. God says he will not only bring them back, but also unite them again. Judah and Israel, no longer divided. Could this be a prophecy about the coming Messiah? A new David? A greater shepherd? If the tribes were truly gone forever, why would God promise to bring them back? Unless they were never truly lost, just hidden, preserved for God's perfect timing. Today, the Jewish people are mostly associated with Judah, Benjamin, and Levi, the tribes who returned from Babylonian exile. But small parts of the other tribes may have quietly returned too, slowly blending back into the people of Judah over time. Even the New Testament mentions tribal identities. In Luke 2 verse 36, the prophetess Anna is from the tribe of Asher, one of the northern tribes many thought had disappeared. In Philippians 3 verse 5, the Apostle Paul says he is from the tribe of Benjamin. These are not just distant memories. They are proof that God's covenant continued, even after exile. Beyond the Bible, many communities around the world claim to descend from the lost tribes. The Beta Israel in Ethiopia say they come from the tribe of Dan. In India, the Bianaminishi claim they are from Manasseh. In Afghanistan, some tribal traditions also trace back to ancient Israel. Even in Europe, some legends suggest migrations of Israelites westward. Could it be that God's people are more widespread and mysterious than we've ever imagined? And the prophecies continue. In Isaiah 11 verses 11 to 12, God promises, "In that day, the Lord will reach out a second time to gather his people from Assyria, Egypt, and distant islands. He will gather the scattered of Israel and the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth." This is not just another gathering. It is a second Exodus, a global awakening, greater than the first. The book of Revelation gives us one last piece of the mystery. In Revelation 7 verses 4 to 8, John sees a vision of 144,000 people, 12,000 from each tribe, sealed by God for a special purpose in the end times. This shows that even after exile and scattering, the tribes are still known in heaven, named, counted, remembered. Isn't that amazing? What humanity thinks is lost, God has never forgotten. So where are the tribes now? Maybe in synagogues in Jerusalem. Maybe in small villages in Ethiopia. Maybe in hidden places around the world, known by heaven, but lost to history. And maybe, just maybe, some of them walk among us today, unaware of their ancient roots, but still carrying a covenant that can never be broken. They may not remember who they are yet. The 12 tribes were scattered, but they are not forgotten. They may be hidden, but they are not lost to God. As long as God's covenant stands, and it always will, their story is not over. And when the trumpet sounds and God's banner is raised, they will come home. The same God who kept his promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is still working, still gathering, and still keeping his word. The 12 gates of the New Jerusalem are marked with the names of the 12 tribes. See Revelation 21 verse 12. A final, eternal reminder that God always finishes what he starts.